I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I work as a corporate insolvency lawyer in Toronto, the kind of job where I spend my days picking apart shell companies and frozen assets for the banks. Exactly 14 months after my divorce was finalized, I ran into my ex-husband outside the hospital for sick children on University Avenue. He stood there in his charcoal Hugo Boss coat, smirking, while my former best friend stood beside him, bouncing their 8-month-old daughter on her hip. He looked at me like I was something he'd scraped off his shoe and said, leaving me was the smartest financial decision he'd ever made, because a woman who couldn't carry a pregnancy past 12 weeks wasn't worth the RRSP contributions. I didn't cry. I checked the time on my watch and waited for the moment his entire world came apart in that hospital lobby. 90 seconds later, a man in a gray wool coat walked through the sliding doors, and my former best friend dropped the diaper bag she was carrying like it had caught fire. Before any of that, let me back up. It was the kind of gray November morning that Toronto specializes in, sleet ticking against the windows of my brother-in-law's Audi as we sat in the parking garage off University. My sister Ren had just had her gallbladder out. Routine, the surgeon kept saying, completely routine. And I'd taken the morning off work to bring her home. I had my blazer on under my coat because I'd told myself I'd swing by the office after, that this would take an hour tops. I was 34 years old. I had built a career out of staying calm when other people's lives were falling apart on a spreadsheet in front of me, and I genuinely believed nothing in a hospital lobby could rattle me anymore. I'd been wrong before. I was about to be wrong again, just not in the way I expected. I came around the corner from the discharge desk with Ren's paperwork in my hand, and there he was, Caspian, 37. Still wearing that navy suit he bought, because some menswear blog told him navy reds as trustworthy, standing square in the middle of the corridor like he owned the floor tiles. And next to him, Brielle, my best friend since we were 19 years old, sharing a dorm room at Western, the woman who'd stood up at my wedding and cried real tears, holding a baby with Caspian's exact nose. The corridor was full. Nurses, a porter pushing an empty gurney, a young couple flipping through pamphlets near the elevators. Caspian wanted that. He'd always wanted an audience. It was the entire architecture of the man. "Well, look who it is," he announced loud enough that the porter actually slowed down. "Marisette. Still haunting hospitals, I see. Fitting, given how the marriage ended." I didn't answer. I adjusted my grip on Ren's discharge folder. "You know," he went on, "warming up, performing now, leaving you was the best decision of my life. A woman who can't even carry a child to term. What exactly was I supposed to build a future with?" Brielle gave me Sienna in 9 months, no complications, no drama. Funny how that works. Brielle had the decency to look uncomfortable at least, bouncing the baby a little too hard, her eyes sliding anywhere but my face. I remembered her at my wedding shower the year before, telling everyone I was the strongest woman she knew. I remembered the 3 miscarriages she'd held my hand through. Apparently, somewhere between the second and third, she'd decided my husband looked like consolation prize money. "That's quite a thing to announce in a hospital corridor," I said finally, my voice even. "Considering this is a children's hospital. There are families here who'd give anything for a healthy birth, and you're using one as a scoreboard." His jaw tightened. He hadn't expected calm. People like Caspian build their whole personality around expecting you to scream so they can call you unstable in front of witnesses. "Cute," he said. Still playing the cold, controlled lawyer routine. "It's why I left, you know. Ice doesn't make a home." "No," I agreed. "But it does make excellent collateral when you need to freeze someone's assets." He laughed, short and sharp, like I'd made a joke. He had no idea I'd been doing exactly that quietly for the past 4 months. Here is what Caspian didn't know about me. I didn't just do corporate restructuring. I specialized in tracing money that didn't want to be found. The kind that moved through numbered companies in Alberta and shell partnerships registered in Delaware. The kind banks hired forensic teams like mine to chase down when a director's signature stopped matching the numbers in the ledger. And 4 months before that hospital corridor, a former colleague of Caspian's at the investment firm, a junior analyst named Dax, who'd always had a soft spot for me back when I used to bring muffins to the office Christmas parties, had quietly slid an unmarked USB drive across a table at a coffee shop on Bloor Street and told me he couldn't sleep anymore. Caspian had been running a private wealth management book on the side, outside his firm's compliance, taking money from clients, mostly retirees, mostly people who trusted the easy charm and the watch and the navy suit, and funneling it into a numbered company that didn't actually invest in anything. It just moved money from new clients to pay returns to old ones. A Ponzi structure textbook, the kind I'd built my entire career learning to spot from 40 feet away. $600,000 conservatively, possibly more once OSC investigators got their hands on the full books. I hadn't told anyone yet. Not the Ontario Securities Commission, not my sister, not even my own lawyer. I'd spent those 4 months quietly, meticulously building the file, the way I built every file, patiently, without emotion, until the case was so airtight that no expensive defense lawyer on Bay Street could find a seam in it. I wasn't ready yet. I needed one more piece, a forensic accountant's signature on the trace, and I'd been told that morning it would land within the week. Standing in that hospital corridor, listening to him perform his cruelty for an audience of strangers, I had a choice. I could let this go another week, stick to the plan, file everything cleanly through proper channels, or I could let him keep talking. I let him keep talking. You know what's funny, Caspian continued, clearly enjoying himself now, oblivious to the small crowd that had quietly slowed to listen. Brielle actually thanks me sometimes. Said being with a real man, someone who can actually provide, who isn't married to a job that pays for nothing but stress, changed her whole life. The condo in Yorkville, the Tesla. None of that was happening on a teacher's salary. Brielle flinched at that. Caspian had just announced in public that he was bankrolling her lifestyle, the exact kind of admission that the OSC's forensic team would have salivated over getting on record. I almost smiled. Almost. Where is all that money coming from, Caspian? I asked, mild as a Tuesday. Your base salary at Haller & Pierce hasn't moved in 3 years. I do still get the firm's public filings sent to me, you know. Force of habit. Something flickered behind his eyes, not panic yet, just a faint, irritated recalibration. The look of a man who'd forgotten his ex-wife's entire profession was reading financial statements for a living. Don't worry about my finances, he said, voice dropping half a register. Worry about getting back to your empty condo, alone. With your dead-end uterus and your spreadsheets. A woman near the pamphlet rack actually gasped audibly. The porter had stopped pushing the gurney entirely. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I looked at my watch, an old habit, checking the time before court, except there was no court here, just instinct telling me something was about to happen. And then the sliding doors at the end of the corridor opened, and a man in a gray wool coat walked in carrying a slim leather folio, scanning the hallway like he was looking for someone specific. Dax. Beside Caspian, Brielle made a small strangled sound, and the diaper bag slid right off her shoulder, hitting the linoleum with a soft, heavy thud, baby wipes and a spare onesie spilling across the floor. She knew Dax. She'd met him at the firm's holiday party 2 years ago, back when she still thought she was marrying up into something stable. What is he doing here, she said. Not really a question, more a statement collapsing in on itself. Caspian turned, and for the first time that morning, the smugness slid off his face like wax off a candle left too close to a flame. This isn't a coincidence, is it? He said slowly, looking back at me. I told you, I said. I do still read the public filings. I also still talk to the people you used to work with. Dax has been very generous with his time these past few months. Dax reached us, nodded once at me. Professional, brief, and addressed Caspian directly. Haller & Pierce's internal compliance team got an anonymous tip 3 days ago about an unregistered investment vehicle running under your name. They pulled your trading badge this morning. I figured you'd want to hear it from someone you knew before the OSC investigators showed up at your office. You set this up, Caspian said to me, low and furious now, the performance entirely gone, the audience forgotten. You orchestrated this. I didn't orchestrate anything, I said. I just kept doing my job. You're the one who built a Ponzi scheme on top of stolen client trust, and then stood in a hospital lobby bragging about the condo it paid for, in front of witnesses, with a securities analyst walking in behind you. It wasn't quite true that I hadn't orchestrated anything. I had in fact made one phone call to Dax that morning, the moment I'd seen the medical appointment in Brielle's calendar invite that I was, embarrassingly, still seed on from our wedding planning days 2 years ago, a relic neither of us had ever bothered to remove. I'd known they'd be here. I hadn't known he'd be cruel enough to do exactly what he did, in exactly the way he did it, but I'd built my entire career on understanding that men like Caspian never miss the chance to perform their own downfall, as long as someone's watching. You bitter, calculating, Caspian started. Careful, I said. There are children's hospital security cameras up there, and a recording of everything you just said about my medical history in a public hallway. I'd think very carefully about what comes out of your mouth next. because right now the worst thing on record is your arrogance. Give it another sentence and it becomes harassment. He stopped. For the first time in 14 months, Caspian Whitlock had absolutely nothing to say. The next 6 weeks moved the way these things move once the machinery starts, slowly at first, then all at once. The OSC froze Caspian's accounts within 72 hours of Dax's tip, citing his compliance file and 3 client complaints that had been quietly accumulating for months. My forensic file, the one I'd built over 4 patient months, became the backbone of the province's case once I formally handed it over to the investigators. Every wire transfer, every numbered company, every dollar that moved from a retired schoolteacher in Mississauga into Caspian's joint account with Brielle. Brielle's name was on that account. That detail mattered more than almost anything else. She'd told investigators, when they finally came for her too, that she didn't know where the money came from, that she'd simply assumed Caspian was good at his job. But the Crown's forensic accountant, not me, I'd recused myself the moment it became a criminal matter, conflict of interest and all that, found 6 separate text messages where Brielle had asked Caspian, in writing, whether the new clients were going to be a problem, and whether they should move some of it before the audit. Willful blindness doesn't hold up well against a paper trail. It never does. Caspian was charged under the Securities Act, and once the dollar figure climbed past the 700,000 mark with 2 more victims coming forward, the Crown added fraud charges under the criminal code. He took a plea in the end, 18 months at a provincial facility, restitution orders that would follow him for the rest of his working life, a permanent ban from the securities industry. The watch, the suit, the Yorkville condo, all of it went to satisfy the restitution order, distributed back to the retirees whose RRSPs he'd gutted. Brielle wasn't charged criminally. The Crown couldn't quite make willful blindness stick to a fraud charge with the threshold they needed, but the civil suit from the affected clients named her directly as a beneficiary of the proceeds, and family court took an even harder line. Custody of Sienna went to Caspian's mother, a retired pharmacist in Etobicoke who I'd always liked, actually, who called me 8 months later, not to apologize exactly, just to say she was sorry it had ended the way it had, and that she hoped I'd consider letting her bring Sienna by sometime, once things had settled, because the baby had no other family worth speaking of anymore. I said I'd think about it. I meant it. Brielle lost the condo within the month, lost the Tesla 2 weeks after that, repossessed from the underground parking garage on a Tuesday morning, witnessed, I was told, by half the building. She'd tried teaching again, but the story had made the Toronto papers. Not huge coverage, a single Star article and a few Reddit threads, but Toronto's financial sector is smaller than people think, and the school board where she'd applied did a basic background search before the second interview. Last I heard, secondhand, through someone who still talked to her sister, she was working retail at a mall outside Brampton, renting a bachelor unit above a dry cleaner's, riding the GO train an hour each way, because she couldn't afford to live closer. I didn't celebrate that. I want to be honest about that part. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over you when you watch someone's entire constructed life collapse, and it isn't triumph. Not really. It's closer to exhaustion. Closer to grief for the person you thought she was, back before she decided my husband's cruelty was a price worth paying for a nicer postal code. What I did instead in the months after was build something of my own. I made partner at the firm the following spring, the youngest woman to make partner in the firm's history, a detail that made the local business press for half a day and then nobody cared anymore, which was honestly a relief. I bought a condo of my own near the distillery district, modest by the standards of the life Caspian used to promise me, paid for entirely in cash, with nobody's name on the deed but mine. I started seeing someone new, eventually slowly a structural engineer named Theo who has never once commented on my biological purpose, and who cried actual tears the day I told him I was finally pregnant, 11 months into our relationship, no drama, just 2 people who wanted the same quiet life. I still think about that hospital corridor sometimes. Not with anger anymore, that faded faster than I expected it to. What I think about is the look on Caspian's face in the half-second between "you orchestrated this" and realizing there was nothing left to say. The realization that the woman he'd spent years calling cold and broken had simply been listening the entire time, patient as a glacier, and that her silence had never once meant surrender. People love to tell you that the best revenge is living well. I used to think that was a platitude printed on a throw pillow. I don't think that anymore. I think it's the only revenge that actually holds up in court. The only kind that doesn't require you to become the person who hurt you in the first place. I didn't destroy Caspian and Brielle out of spite. I just stopped protecting them from the consequences of who they already were and let the truth do what truth always eventually does when nobody's left to cover for it. The last I heard, Caspian was out on parole, working as a delivery driver in Mississauga, banned for life from the industry that once gave him his suits and his swagger. He is, by every account I've heard, a ghost of the man who stood in that corridor. I, meanwhile, am simply living. That turned out to be more than enough.